Nyama, Wurundjeri Kulin, Mirambikal Bik Winarop Daraban, Bagangwal Awit Juri, Bagangukal Nangit, Bambuth Ba Yellingbu. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land Darebin Council stands and pay my respects to elders past and present. Tonight we're hearing the Planning Committee meeting and membership is as listed in the agenda. Are there any disclosures of conflicts of interest, councillors? No, there being no disclosures of conflicts of interest, we'll continue. The next item is confirmation of the minutes of the Planning Committee. Thank you, Councillor Amir, seconded by Councillor Lassurf. All those in favour? That is carried. Yes,
Can I just correct membership? It doesn't show that Councillor Williams is absent.
I'm expecting Councillor Williams will arrive, so yep. Thank you, Councillor Messina. So that brings us to consideration of reports, and the first item is 5.1, which is 1056 to 1140 Plenty Road. Mr. Rudd.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Can you hear me okay?
Are you green here? Oh, that one.
Apologies for that. This application seeks to amend an existing development plan for the Polaris Estate in Plenty Road, Bundoora. As the report explains, this estate is nearing completion of development, and there is a good explanation in the report about the history of this site. This application comes to the Planning Committee as a result of a planning appeal being lodged, resulting from a decision by the permit applicant to appeal rather than address some concerns that were raised during the application process. The application before the committee proposes changes to Lot S9 and Lot S3. These are shown on page 5 of the officer's report. So I'll just bring those up on screen. So you'll see there that Lot S9 fronts Plenty Road, Lot S3 fronts Main Drive. The changes generally described as seeking approval to increase the building heights from 3 to 7 stories in the case of buildings fronting Plenty Road, and also 2 to 5 stories. There is a further change proposed to increase the building height of the building proposed on Main Drive from 2 to 3 stories up to 7. I will point out that the 7-storey is what I call a sheer interface with the street, so it rises straight up 7 stories. There's no setback proposed for the upper floors. And that's one of the key issues that was raised during the application process. So the specific changes are listed in more detail on page 5 of the officer's report. There was notice of this application widely circulated, and there have been no objections received. As set out on page 3 of the officer's report, the recommendation is that the development plan should not be supported based on those 3 grounds, and you'll note the 3 grounds include 3A to G. What these set out in summary is there's a failure to get the massing and proportions right in context with the rest of this town centre location. Council also has availed itself of urban design advice, and it specifies, particularly for Main Drive, the importance of a street wall or a setback for those upper floors as it transitions up to 7 stories. That advice also questions whether that scale is appropriate, because in the La Trobe University master plan, they are contemplating a 3-storey, or what we call a 3-storey facade or street wall on the other side of Main Drive. So if this recommendation is ratified to not support the application, this view will be put forth in a hearing scheduled for the 22nd of August 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd. Councillors, are there any questions? No? There are no people here to submit on this item tonight, so is there a motion?
I'd move the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence, and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lawrence.
If we don't stand, do we?
No.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. Look, this is recommendation to not support it is supported by some fairly solid grounds that relate back to the design development plan, and we've obviously had a great deal of thought about this low density end of the city, which is a shopping complex which is surrounded by low density housing with a high amount of preserved vegetation, and it's not appropriate the heights that they're actually seeking here.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor McCarthy.
Mr Rudd has, and Councillor Lawrence has also highlighted the failings in relation to this proposal in its current form. I would note that we have dealt with this site on many occasions, so it is a significant site, and I stand by the officer's proposal to take the position that we have. I think it's also worth noting that whilst in this case there haven't been any submitters, this is an evidence-based response, and on that basis, I'm very happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Council has resolved not to support the Polaris Development Plan on the grounds listed in the agenda. That will bring us to item 5.2 on the agenda. Mr Rudd.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. This application could be described as the opposite of the one that the Planning Committee have just decided on. This relates to Lot 9. It's a section of land towards the rear of the site. It shares a street with some existing residential homes in Ganella Crescent. And why I say it's different to the previous proposal, as opposed to increasing the intensity of the development, this one proposes to reduce it. It's really a response to market conditions. Currently, the development plan approved for Lot 9 shows, and you'll see a map of that identified and labelled on page 16 of the officer's report. What's currently approved is a 4-storey apartment development, and the proposal is to replace that with 2-storey townhouses. And that's a similar form to what's shown opposite this site in Ganella Crescent, where there is a combination of family homes which are single and double-storey. There's also a few townhouses in this site. The assessment is that being a development plan change, this will enable a planning permit to be issued. There's one being lodged, Mayor Rennie, for that. We think the change is less intensive. There are changes also to the car parking. There are some inconsequential changes which are detailed in the report about setbacks that slightly vary from the previous proposal. But our assessment is this is probably a better response than the previous one to the site context. Therefore, this development plan is recommended for support.
Thank you, Mr Rudd. Councillors, are there any questions? No, there are no submitters listed to speak to this item.
Happy to move the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence, and seconded by Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'm delighted to move and support this motion, these amended plans, which are an improvement, has been noticed by our officers, and integrate well with the integrate better than the previous plans with the neighbourhood character next door to this area. And obviously this was an original state government project dating back 20 years, so the residents are very much looking forward to these empty vacant blocks being full of people and houses and being made more safe than it currently is.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I also acknowledge the words that have been already mentioned by Councillor Lawrence and Mr. Rudd, and I support the recommendation by the office. It's quite uncommon to see a development come back to us for an amendment to reduce the number of levels and to actually improve the overall look and feel of a particular development. So I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. The Planning Committee has decided to approve the development plan. Please note that both Planning and Environment Act and the Darebin Planning Scheme do not provide appeal rights for submitters. The applicant does, however, have appeal rights and can seek a review of Council's decision at BCAT. That brings us to the third item on the agenda. Mr. Rudd.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Council received an application at 67 to 73 Marnies Road in Reservoir. The proposal is to demolish 3 dwellings and construct a double-storey building, and it's proposed to be used as a police station to house 93 staff with 10 operational vehicles, and 48 car spaces are to be provided on site with vehicle access directly onto Marnies Road. The proposal shows the public's access would be in the northeast corner and emergency ingress would be from that same area, with emergency egress in the northwest corner of the site. Notice was given on site and letters to the surrounding owners and occupiers. 2 objections have been received, and these objections are summarised on pages 30 and 31 of the report and then responded to on pages 31 through to 33. As it is described and explained in the officer's report, this proposed development and use is appropriate for this area. Although it's a residential zone, the zone allows for provision of non-residential uses to serve local community needs. Also, the site is located adjacent to a road zone category 1 and on a key east-west transport route. It's opposite commercial industrial area but has residential areas to the southeast and west of the actual site. Conditions will be included to protect the residential amenity of these properties. The building form and design is appropriate, and its response considering the site covers the 4 residential lots. It has reasonable setbacks to all boundaries. Therefore, the officer's recommendation is to support the proposal and issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some submitters who are here to speak to this item tonight. I might start with Station Commander Peter Sambell. Please come up to the table. You have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Look, we understand that there has been some concern raised about relocating the Reservoir Police Station to a site away from where it is in Edward Street. The difficulty we have as an organisation is being able to find land within a municipality that is well established and that will fulfil our needs into the future. The site that was chosen will enable us to do that, albeit with some angst within the community about us relocating. The reality is that that 93 staff incorporates a specialist family violence response and investigation unit, and the key work that we perform in Reservoir is actually addressing family violence. And obviously the City of Darebin has made a huge commitment to preventing violence against women and children. And we enjoy a great working relationship with Council in trying to prevent that. So being able to have those investigators at that unit will mean that we can actually afford to inject greater resources into the City of Darebin to address family violence. We just need to think a bit more sophisticated around how we deliver and continue to deliver policing services to the local community, and that community that's been used to having a police station on its doorstep for the last 65 years. So our tasking model will look at how we can best do that. We do that now. We don't We're in a position now where Victoria Police does not necessarily expect people to come into the front door of a police station. We're rolling out the police assistance line and online reporting, which will mean that we will reduce the amount of time that is taken by frontline police attending to counter inquiries, which will mean that we can free up staff to actually be out on patrol. And that will mean, hopefully, into the future, the ability to provide resources back into those areas where we feel that they're best needed. Those areas that can be identified through our crime trends, data, that sort of analysis. Our CAD data and the Crime Statistics Agency data doesn't necessarily support the claim or the perception that Edward Street and the precinct is an unsafe area. Having said that, perception forms a belief, and we will continue to provide resources to Edward Street to respond to any actual trends that we have. We afford a great opportunity with the Local Traders Association to continue to work with them and address those needs, and obviously work with council, particularly with the hub and corrections up the road. We look forward to continuing that as best we can when we relocate. But it will certainly enable us to provide a more modern facility to address the policing needs within Darebin, and particularly within the Reservoir Response Zone, because that's, after all, what this police station's delivering a service to, Reservoir.
Great. Thank you very much for your submission. You may resume your seat. I have one other submitter listed, and that is Ms. Maureen Jackson. Is Ms. Jackson here?
Sorry, I'm not speaking. I'm here answering questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll just check that there are no other members of the gallery who are expecting. Okay. So those are the submissions. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Messina.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Rennie. Can I just get some clarity? This is a complete relocation of the Reservoir Police Station, and there will be no presence, apart from Mahoney's Road, of police at the new elevated rail or at the current police station.
Mr. Rudd? Or...
Yeah, that's correct. That's our understanding.
Okay. Mr. Samble, no, I'm sorry, you're not able to answer questions from councillors at this point. Thank you. Councillor Amir, you had a question? No. No? Okay. Councillor McCarthy.
Just happy to move the recommendation unless there's any questions.
I'll just check that there are no other questions. No, there are no other questions. So moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, and I also thank the submitter for providing some context in relation to this application. The first thing I'd like to say in relation to this application is that it is not often that we consider an application of this type, which is obviously a planning application, but which has an impact on the delivery of a very important service in our community. And I think we need to keep in mind that our consideration of this application is on planning grounds rather than on where we think the most appropriate place might be to locate a police station. That is not up for debate here. That is certainly not something which we can make as a primary consideration, even though we may have views on that, and that's not a matter for this particular item. I would note, though, and I just would refer to the submitter's comments in support of the application, that one of the major pieces of work that will be undertaken at this site, should this permit be approved, will be obviously the family violence work, which is not in the context of any shopping strip, but is in fact in people's homes. And so for me, the location of locating a police station on a road like Mahoney's Road makes complete sense in terms of being a major thoroughfare. But obviously it's up to the occupants, being the Victoria Police, to work out how they do their business from that site rather than us determining that for them. In relation to the planning matters that have been raised, I accept the officer's responses in relation to those proposed objections. Most notably, I would note that having looked at this evidence myself, there is no evidence to suggest that the proximity of a police station increases criminal activity. In fact, it's actually quite the opposite in relation to what actually does take place. So it's been interesting to look at this from the social context. I understand the concerns that people would have in relation to having a construction of this size and scale, which would replace 3 dwellings. And I totally appreciate why people may feel in a sense to object on that basis. And obviously the building process, having experienced that at my own property on 2 sides now in the last 10 years, it can be frustrating, and I don't think we're ever going to look past that at all. But that is not a ground upon which we can make a determination in relation to the validity of this application. We need to consider it on its planning merits, and on the basis of what we have in front of us here, I'm inclined to support it. Obviously, there is going to be a period of disruption locally when this takes place and this construction takes place, but I'm sure our officers will work with both the applicant and also the neighbouring property owners, as we do with all developments, to work through any issues as we go forward. On that basis, I'm inclined to support it, and I thank everyone who's submitted both in favour and against in relation to their participation.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I really second what Councillor McCarthy said, and I just wanted to speak from my experience from the last couple of years of having dealt with the Victorian Police in Reservoir and residents, where there has been a bit of a perception that residents in the south of the municipality might get a response quicker or easier than some residents in the north. And so for me, the fact that this is going to increase the size of the police station and the amount of staff is really, really positive. And yeah, I completely agree with Councillor McCarthy in the report that I think the residents at Keon Park will eventually be quite happy to have a police station so close if there is anything that's happening in their area. So I think this is a really positive move for the city. I do also acknowledge that it will be challenging for the Edward Street precinct, who are used to having the police officers patrol quite regularly, and I'm sure that won't change. It's just going to be where the physical location of the building is. So I really commend the Victoria Police for this application, and I think it'll be a really good thing for Keon Park and North Reservoir.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers? No? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is carried. The Planning Committee has decided to approve the permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days to appeal any condition of the permit. Notices detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant next week. Councillors, that brings us to item 6 on the agenda, which is other business. There is none. Item 7, urgent business. There is none. 8, consideration of reports considered confidential. There are none, and so that's 9. Close of meeting. Thank you. The Planning Committee is over. And please don't leave, councillors, because I have a proposition in relation to the rest of the evening. Thank you to members of the gallery. Okay. Thank you to members of the gallery who came. The next meeting starts at 7:30, so we'll ask you to leave and we'll see you at 7:30 if you're keen to hang around.